ZKGM, everyone. Welcome to the Union Hall Builders Cast. Today I'm here with Josh from Irys. Another quite cool project. I hadn't heard about it before, to be honest. I've been browsing it all day, like the data chain and their alternative consensus. So some cool stuff to dive into today and learn a bit more about. Josh, maybe kick us off with an intro about yourself and your project.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Josh, I guess, founder, CEO of Irys. I guess my background, I got into crypto about 5.5 years ago. And actually at the time I was still studying computer science in the UK, which is where I'm from. And I got into crypto and mostly got very deep into, let's say, the Ethereum side of the space, and then naturally transitioned to what is actually quite a a less common perhaps route within crypto, which is focused more on the data side of the space. And that transition came because before crypto, I was actually very focused on databases, so open source databases, specifically SQL. So I'd always had an interest in data in the general sense. And then when I discovered data chains like Arweave, Filecoin, Stored Seer, Chia as well, back in late 2020, I made the decision to dive into this side of the space, which is where Irys initially began. So I started building Irys in early 2021, so around April time. We actually initially started as a layer 2 for a blockchain called Arweave, which is a permanent storage chain. And the big problem we were solving back then was that Arweave was this very unscalable chain, and the ecosystem was very small. And the goal for us was, okay, grow this ecosystem, grow this chain. So we did that, and we launched that around August time, 2021. We actually had a ton of success there. So we launched around August time. I dropped out of school a couple months after that. And in the first 2 years, we took Arweave from about 10,000 transactions a day to about 15 million a day, onboarded about 300 plus projects. And then fast forwarding about just over a year and a half ago, we made the decision to move away from Arweave and actually build our own layer 1, our own data chain, really focusing on, okay, how do we actually build a product that people want to use? That's number one, because I saw a lot of issues in the data chain space that couldn't be solved without really rebuilding the protocol from scratch. So that was the goal for Irys, was, okay, how do we actually build this really high performance data chain that is, as I said, high performance, low cost, low latency. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. So when we talk about what Irys is, we're essentially building a programmable data chain, so a chain optimized to store data. And when I say programmable, we have our own VM called Irys VM that allows you to deploy applications on the chain and also make use of the data that you store on the network as well, which actually allows you to build, I guess, more expressive, more interesting applications on top of the actual data itself. That's the long introduction into me and Irys.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Full of overlap actually between my own background and yours. I've got a couple of PostgreSQL extensions that I wrote and maintain. It's like a little bit of a hobby for me to also still keep up with the regular database scene. Yeah, also is useful. So yeah, I'm kind of trying to like position your project and for people listening in, like how does this compare to, let's say, for example, a Celestia or an Avail, where it's like a different category, right? Because then we're speaking about data availability, which sounds very similar, but is something completely different, right? From what I catch, what you can do with it, because I don't think you can like retrieve data from Celestia in a smart contract, right? You just know like data with this hash has been seen by nodes, but can't really operate on it.
Yeah, so I'll actually give you, I mean, this is a very common question. I blame the bad naming from the DA community, but yeah, so the difference between what is essentially data storage and data availability, so we do the storage side, is that storage is more focused on how do you kind of provide incentives and prove that someone is holding or storing data for long periods of time. Availability is how do you prove that someone is able to share the data with you? Now, it's a very like tiny difference there, but the better mental model is one is a verifiable form of storage and another is a verifiable form of bandwidth, where data storage is obviously verifiable storage, and the data availability is how do you verify the data being shared or the bandwidth being shared between different nodes. So when you talk about the downstream of that very technical definition, Storage networks can store data for arbitrary periods of time, so a day, a week, a month, a year, forever, whatever. Data availability networks usually only hold data for about 2 weeks. It's far more expensive to obviously store on data availability networks as well, because you pay this massive bandwidth cost associated with data availability. And the actual use case is obviously very different as well. So storage is used for everything, basically, every application that you ever touch on the internet. Data availability is really only used nowadays for posting roll-up data. So very high value financial data is kind of posted to data availability layers. Other than that, there aren't many use cases outside of that kind of category of use case.
Yeah, I guess for data availability as well, the purpose is different, right? It's really only in case that you want to like post a fraud proof, or if like a sequencer stops producing blocks and that like someone else could like boot up a sequencer and start producing ZKPs, right? Like resume sequencing. It's not really like active retrieval in a smart contract to do something with that data, right? As I kind of gather that Irys is like intended to be used in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Irys is used in and out of smart contracts as well, in the sense that people just use Irys to store app data and retrieve app data from the web application, for example. And yeah, I guess I want to drill into that point. Data availability networks are not competitive with Irys in any way whatsoever. Like the use cases are like so different. We are not built for rollups, and they are not built for like arbitrary information. So the use cases are entirely different, and which is why definitely at the beginning we got a lot of questions about especially when Celestial was much bigger. There were a lot of questions of like, well, what is the difference? So
that makes sense. I do like from like an engineering perspective, I can get why a DA network kind of like remains easy to operate, because you keep the data for 2 weeks, bandwidth remains constant, but I guess like state relatively constant, since at some point you have a steady state system where rollups post a terabyte a day, but you're also deleting a terabyte a day. And now with something like Irys, I wonder, well, because you keep the data forever, how does this play out? Because the Solana ledger itself is already like what 1,000 terabytes or something ridiculous, right? I tried to sync up a BNB full node for our like a bridge to generate proofs, and it also takes like, I don't know, 100 days if you ever manage to complete the full sync. How do you like balance this with a protocol like Irys?
Yeah, so we actually have worked on, I personally have worked on some of those things. I actually spent some time working on archiving the Solana ledger as well. It's an interesting problem. Yeah, so this is actually a use case that I also spent more time on, because I remember I spoke to Mustafa at Celestia and a bunch of different rollups. And I think over time, although rollups right now are fairly immature is the wrong word, but not mature, not matured yet. There isn't a lot of data to like store yet, but there definitely will be compliance reasons and practical reasons why people want to have a very high performance way to archive a lot of this data. So that's actually a use case that that I would say is on the horizon, but is not really there yet. There is Solana, there is perhaps BNB, but there are maybe only 2 or 3 chains that fit into that category, and all the other ones are either not high performance enough, or not popular enough, or just not old enough. One of those 3 things. I think Solana, BNB is the first time I've actually heard someone say BNB for that. But I guess
they like early on in their journey, they kind of, I think they originally forked like Ethereum, put Tendermint under, and they made the block size like 50 megabytes or something crazy. So it has like a massive ledger that takes forever to sync. I'm just very curious, like, can Irys like scale up to like permanently store a terabyte of extra data a day? Does it recycle it at some point, or do full nodes not need to store all the data? Like how do you keep it manageable?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's actually mostly an economic question. The question is, how do you incentivize something to be stored for long periods of time? So just to kind of talk about Irys's feature set, we both support storing data for a short period of time. So you can store data for a day, or you can store data also permanently. And you just basically pay more depending on how long you want to store it. So the way that the permanent side works is that you pay for about 200 years worth of storage. And then that goes into kind of like a treasury or an endowment is the name that we use. And then over time, those tokens are taken out of the endowment and paid out to miners to cover their cost. So basically, there's a very high upfront cost that you pay, which is then used to then cover the cost of storage over time. And then what we do is we say, okay, we know that the cost of storage, the cost of actual hardware declines every year or declines over time. So we also make the assumption that the cost declines, and we make the assumption of 1% per year, which kind of creates this. I'm trying to think about which way it is, but this graph where it basically declines to zero over time. In reality, if you look at the last 30 years, every year it's either between 10 and 30% that the cost of storage has gone down. So 1% is a very, very, very conservative estimate. And to be honest, there were even discussions internally of saying to like 5%, but we decided to be more conservative in the end. So that's how it works in terms of scaling. You said a terabyte a day. Yeah, that's absolutely no, but that's actually not that much data, to be honest. I guess the answer is that you don't store data on every single node on the network. So if you have 1,000 nodes on Irys's network or on a storage network, you essentially store it on an n number of the miners. In this case, it's 10 for permanent data. So that means that both the storage and the bandwidth capacity scales horizontally. So if you add an extra 100 nodes to the network, then you'll get all of their bandwidth and all of their storage added to the network, and it's somewhat horizontal scaling.
Makes sense. So if I understand correctly, then really the programmable environment, the Irys blockchain itself, more so functions as that coordination layer for these data storage nodes to figure out how will we shard the data, how do we distribute it, and how do payments proceed? Can I also access the data from this layer as well? Do they feed back data? And can I write smart contracts that requests PDFs from 3 years ago that I uploaded?
Yeah, so the programmability layer is actually quite separate. So what you're talking about around the coordination of the actual resources is more of just it happens at the chain level. So it's a much more low level kind of part of the chain. The programmability component is what we call Irys VM, and that's think of that as like a secondary part of the chain. So we have the data side, and then we have the execution side. And the execution side essentially allows you to deploy and run smart contracts. And then those smart contracts can essentially pull in, manipulate, read and write from Irys's data side of the chain, if that makes sense. So you can store a large amount of that data and then make use of it within smart contracts as well. So that's what we mean when we talk about programmability of the actual data, is that you can actually have this very flexible environment, which is smart contracts, to perform logic or compute.
Yeah, makes sense. And I was checking out the programmable environment is EVM, right?
Ours is EVM compatible. We call it EVM++ because we just add a bunch of functionality pre-compiles to the actual VM as well. So you can do all of the standard EVM, deploying ERC20 or something, and there's also some extra functionality native to Irys that's built into the EVM.
Yes, I guess a bunch of pre-compiles that you guys added to interact with data, do requests, that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So the easiest example is if you want to read a random bit of the data, there's something to read the data. There's a precompile just to read the data. So we have a bunch of precompiles to achieve a bunch of different features that are specific to Irys.
Gotcha, makes sense. Yeah, what I've been very curious about this model is indeed what are some of the use cases, right? Where do we have right now maybe a lot of data that we need to do some trickery, as well as how do you think this competes with CKPs, where maybe someone just hosts all of the data off chain and you just don't do the compute on chain whatsoever, but only the proof of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely use cases for both. In terms of kind of the use cases for this, so one example might be you have a deeper network that generates a large amount of data, maybe in the real world, and then you need to distribute rewards based off of the data that's being generated. Maybe you need to verify that it's correct, or whatever. So you can perform that kind of logic and actually distribute the on-chain rewards directly within the smart contracts based off of the data that's been written to the network. So there are use cases like that. We've also been kind of experimenting with the combination of tokenization with the actual data in the smart contract for things like data IP, but more specifically focused on tokenizing data sets, trading models. Sorry, so many terms there. But essentially trading AI models. But the DeepIn probably demonstrates the use case better. In terms of ZK, it depends on the trade-off. There's some places where ZK is useful, sometimes where it's not useful. There's also ZK is very expensive as well. But I don't think there's a lot of crossover. But like the DeepIn approach would be at least somewhat difficult to do natively. You'd need some like kind of trust assumptions, which you move when you actually enable programmable data. So it kind of depends. But to be honest, if people want to use ZK with Irys, it's fine. Again, we enable all the EVM primitives, so you can use ZK already. So the goal with Irys is that we want to enable some unique use cases, which we do. But also, if you want to use some of the standard technologies that exist today, then you can. We have no strong opinion. As long as people are contributing more data to the network, reading more data from the network, then the value of the network is growing over time. So that's all that we care about.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense overall. How does the, like, let's say, malicious case play out? I have my like family pictures. I'm super happy, right? I put them on Irys for 200 years, but something goes wrong. Like the nodes that were selected, they chose to like store it full on WordMe. How does this kind of play out for me as a user? How does the system detect that? Or is there just a certain risk associated with Irys, same as IPFS, where like, yeah, it's distributed well, but if you want like an absolute guarantee for data integrity, you have to keep it yourself?
No, so IPFS has no incentives whatsoever. So when you store on IPFS, I mean, officially you don't really even pay. You're just kind of trusting that maybe it gets stored forever, which there is no incentive. With Irys, you're actually paying, so there is an incentive. The risk, the way to I guess map out the risk is there are 10 replicas of your data stored by 10 unique miners that are geographically distributed. So what needs to happen is that all 10 replicas need to go down at once and never be recoverable. So the probability of that happening is zero, basically. You would either need massive coordination amongst random miners, which will never happen, or you'll need, I guess, a power outage in the entire world. But if that's happening, then there are probably some more serious issues going on in the world. So there's no real risk around data disappearing. But with that being said, we also have, I guess, incentives and disincentives within the network, right? So the more data you store and the longer you store it for, the more money you make, right? Through block rewards, and you'll receive Irys tokens. That's one. And then two, disincentives. If you commit to store data because you actually you stake tokens, if you don't store the data that you kind of claim to store, then you will be slashed as well. So I'd say there's a few layers. There's the incentives, the disincentives, and then also just the reality that if you have 10 replicas, then your data isn't disappearing, because at least you only need one of them to be alive.
Yeah, it makes sense. For the slashing portion, like, how does that work? How does like the validator set detect that some miner is no longer storing the data?
Yeah, so we essentially measure the read. Okay, taking a step back. So the way that the consensus works on the network is that every miner is continuously sampling or reading random bits of data on their drives, essentially, and then they're generating proofs. And what happens is that basically every day or every day and a half, sorry, they would have sampled the entire chain. So every day and a half, the entire chain has been read. So it's a fairly resilient mechanism. And the idea is that we can easily measure the sampling rate of every single miner on the network. And then when the sampling rate drops below a certain level, then you can essentially submit challenges to miners to generate a proof that they are storing some data. So that's the rough way. And if they don't prove that they're storing the data, then they can get slashed. That's the very kind of simple way to explain the mechanism.
Yeah, quite interesting. And so how does it kind of work, like proof that you're storing the data? Is that using similar techniques to data availability protocols with like erasure encoding and stuff, or do you guys have a different mechanism?
Yeah, we have a different mechanism. We actually don't use erasure encoding. It's a conversation in itself, but we use some, I guess the technical name of the Ethereum people might understand is a proof of custody. It's kind of we actually need to come up with a name for this, but it's a version of a proof of custody where you essentially generate a Merkle root based off of a large a large piece of data. So the way to think about it is that the chain is split up into petitions. Petitions are 22 terabytes. The 22 terabytes are split into 256 kilobyte chunks. And then what you can do is you can generate Merkle proofs or Merkle tree, sorry, of all of the chunks all the way up to the top. And then the challenge includes what is known as entropy, random entropy that can't be pre-calculated, meaning that there is a fixed cost associated with generating the proof. So generating the proof always takes a fixed amount of time and also therefore a fixed amount of compute, electricity, and cost to actually, to generate, if that makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
So if I have it correctly, because you use the term miners, but really what these miners are doing is it like this proof generation, technically, like taking the entropy, the RNG that the chain generates and creating one of these like Merkle inclusion proofs, or are they doing more traditional mining?
At least, I mean, that's a good question. At least for the challenge process, which is a custom process outside of consensus per se, it uses this entry process. For the actual core consensus, there's the sampling. It's not traditional proof of work. Like it's not burn as much electricity as possible, which is traditional proof of work. It's more like the work itself is reading the chain, and you're actually not wasting any resources. You are literally using as little resources as possible. And the work component is just the reading of your hard drives. So it is a miner in the sense that it is a proof of work chain. They are doing work, but it is also very different to a Bitcoin miner or an Ethereum proof of work miner.
Okay, gotcha. So from like a hardware perspective, then is this miner more so constrained by like the read speed of the disk versus like a CPU or GPU that's doing the mining? Is that kind of what we're measuring here? If I want to like 2x my mining capacity, I get like 2x the amount of hard drives?
Correct. So the more capacity you have, the higher your hash rate and your higher obviously your sampling rate, and the more rewards you'll make.
Gotcha, because my disks are constantly seeking, I don't know, where I've stored like the data to generate like a proof, etc. And that's effectively my hash rates.
Correct. Yeah. And then every hard drive allows you to generate an extra tens of thousands of proofs per second. But it's throttled per drive. So you need to keep on adding more and more drives in order to scale up your hash rate.
Gotcha. Do I already see parties that like are, I don't know, running like nodes inside like a data center with a ridiculous amount of hard drives? Or is it more so people in their garage at the moment connecting hard drives? It's kind of like the profile for a node operator at the moment.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a hot take, but I'm actually, at least for storage networks, I think focusing on independent operators from the garage is a terrible idea. Reason is that we want to have businesses building on Irys, and to be honest, businesses don't really care about storing the data in your garage. No offense. So we typically like to work with more institutional level operators, whether it's existing data centers, existing validators who run a bunch of other hardware within data centers. So that's our target audience. Also, just more practically, in order to operate, you need to have a stake. You also need to have at least a fair amount of hardware. It's not the cheapest hardware. So there is, a somewhat high cost. However, independent operators could participate in the network. but we, as a company, as a foundation, focus more so on institutional operators.
Gotcha. Is it something that I select as a client, or is that if I do like a data storage request that just gets distributed over random nodes, or can I specify I would like to work specifically with this subset of nodes?
So initially, right now, it's random, so it's a more decentralized solution. But I think even probably this year, we will add the ability to choose specific operators. And I actually think that will, the reason that actually matters is I think you need to support choosing specific geographies or geolocations,
Mhm.
storing your data. And that's the use case that we really want to enable. And that means you need to work with specific operators that exist within specific locations. So TLDR, not yet, but we definitely will do.
Makes sense, yeah. From a technological perspective, this all makes a ton of sense to me. It also makes sense as like the next like increment for like storage layers, right? Like thinking a bit back of like the more older school networks. I remember like Arweave indeed. I guess Filecoin as well was quite big at some point, right? But this seems to be like an improvement on it. Um, how do you see this? You guys take this like institutional first approach because obviously that's where the money is most likely, right? And that's where in the end this scales from like a hobby project, or I guess I would not want to say hobby project, it's a cypherpunk project, to actually like a massive player. How do you see like regulations and stuff playing into this? Because I can imagine if I'm like a bad guy, right, I would just do like requests for storing, I know, child pornography or whatever, right? As like an anonymous user to specifically try to like attack node providers who then, right, suddenly are storing illegal material and are now in trouble, which to me as an outsider seems like a trivial attack to perform, right? Like it wouldn't be difficult for someone to make these requests. Is there like a certain filter layer? Because if you were to filter for this, you would remove a bunch of the decentralization, right? It would like kind of inhibit that.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. The correct way to look at this is that there are actually three categories of content. One is unanimously illegal. So child pornography is illegal in almost probably every country, probably 99% of countries on the planet. There's then the gray area, right? So you can think about maybe some countries are anti-homosexuality or something. But that's legal in half of the world. I'm making numbers up. I have no idea what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that is in the middle that's gray. And then there's the stuff that's always legal. I don't know, pictures of rainbows, always legal.
I don't know. Like in the US, it's becoming questionable, right?
Yeah. maybe. But that's at least the best way to like look at content. So for majority of content that's legal, then that's fine. The illegal content, we have social consensus mechanisms in the network where the people storing the data can say they don't want to store it, and then they'll all come to consensus around that. The question is more around the gray area, which is actually more challenging. The solution is that you don't actually enforce this at the network layer, and you focus it more on, I guess, the distribution layer. What that means is that the gateways on the network, the ways that you kind of read data from the network, can choose not to distribute content. And there will be lots of these different kind of distributors, gateways on the network. So you might think that, or you might see that an operator acting out of a place where homosexuality is illegal won't distribute content that relates to that, for example. And they will just comply with their jurisdiction of their kind of legal jurisdiction. And this is kind of how the internet works today, where some content gets banned by some countries, and some content doesn't, and then doesn't get banned by other countries. So when you go to certain countries, some websites are available and would be available in another country. So we're just kind of copying the model that the internet uses, where we essentially push as much as possible into the social consensus layer, and that will solve most of your problems.
Yeah, and so basically the onus is on operators to make sure that they're staying compliant at the moment. either accepting data or distributing it. As far as I know, like doesn't Facebook have like, I don't know, a warehouse with 5,000 people who all are like checking our pictures to make sure if it's legal or not? Or I know probably nowadays sophisticated AI systems, but I think content moderation is like quite complex, right? And like quite costly to do as well at scale. Is that something that you guys like, that your operators are specialized in, or like maybe it hasn't been a problem yet so far, right? And it's something to scale towards. But I wonder, like, how would you fund like to have an army of content moderators like that as well?
I mean, we definitely don't have an army of content moderators, but
Yeah, I assume so. Yeah.
I'll be very honest. So the way that it will work now is that we would get custom, not custom, but we will get takedown requests essentially. So if we did have some highly illegal content that was being distributed, we or whoever is operating the distribution of this content. So this would be, I guess, whoever's operating the gateway would receive a takedown request or some kind of request from somebody to take it down. And then we have a legal requirement to either refute this or to, as the operator, or to take it down. So that's how the process works. And actually, as I said, my experience was with Arweave mostly, although also I've been adjacent to Filecoin. They've both had these issues, and definitely Arweave, where even more quite benign things where it was like copyright claims, and the gateway would receive a like takedown request because it violates some kind of copyright or something, because I think they published someone's artwork as an NFT or something. I forget what it was. So again, we're just trying to plug into the existing system. It can get very unwieldy very quickly, but we're not there yet. Maybe someone's gonna listen to this and think, okay, I'm gonna ruin Josh's life and try and spam the network with as much like content as possible. But
yeah, maybe I shouldn't actually have like brought up this topic at all. But
I should have banned this. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I don't think this will be an issue for a little while. I'm sure in the next 5 years we will deal with this at some point. The reason Facebook doesn't actually need to have a whole team. They're actually just very. I've actually met someone on their team before, especially someone who was focused on anti-terrorism, weirdly. And they're actually very proactive about it. They actually really care about not having this kind of content, but they don't have to, because they're not. It's not them creating the content, and if they did receive a takedown request, they do respond to them straight away. So, our goal is that, because we're a startup, we can't afford to have 4,000 people, but maybe one day the foundation hires a team of people to be like continuously scanning the network or something. I don't know.
And I guess it's also more of a concern if you're like a big tech company that like feeds people content and like curates a selection, right? Facebook accidentally showing kids like terrorism related content and like putting that in their feed is probably very illegal. But in you guys' case, like someone would like need to navigate specifically to that, right? Like you never feed people data from your site. They need to like know exactly where it is, be actively looking for it. So I guess that's a very different thing from the purpose behind it.
Yeah, the better analogy is not actually Facebook. It's more like AWS. It's like, if AWS stores illegal content, what did they do? Now, I actually don't know what the answer is, but I assume that they have something that scans at least public data. I'm sure there's a lot of data on S3 that's encrypted that's legal, to be honest. I've actually thought about this. They'll never know. But at least for the public data that's stored on S3, that I imagine is scanned by AWS at scale. But again, AWS is a $1 trillion company, so
yeah, exactly. No, that makes a ton of sense. Again, is it you guys, because I saw on the side like you guys mentioned a bit of AI as well. Is this something where you see potentially AI play a role in as well, or is Iris more intended to like be a source that like on-chain AI can use to like, I don't know, leverage certain actions, training, like leveraging data sets stored on Iris?
Yeah, so no, we're not just focused on chain and crypto, to be honest. I actually am I'm more bullish on actually expanding outside of crypto. I think that will be 10 to 100 times more valuable for us. We do work with a lot of the crypto AI projects, but there are only so many, right? there are more non-crypto AI. There are more like just AI projects than there are crypto AI projects. So our focus is more on how do we build for like the masses, so to speak. But crypto is definitely actually just generally a good launch pad for any product, because it's more relationship based. It's smaller. So it's actually much easier to target and focus on. So that's why we started with crypto, and now we're going to be expanding to a lot of the more traditional companies in the next kind of 6 to 12 months.
I guess I agree with that. Like, I was thinking, like, it's probably easiest in crypto to raise seeds, and probably the hardest to do like Series B, and maybe like conversely in the regular tech world, like seeds is hard, but if you're like capable of seeds and like surviving, you have a proper business model, and so Series A and B quite naturally come if like the model works. And crypto very different. Like if you just have any idea, like pre-seed is basically possible, and just to get started and like test out your idea.
I've actually never thought about that, but you're right. That is actually the most succinct description that I've heard. Yeah. I think Series A is doable. Series B, I mean, there are just by number of how many Series Bs have there been? Maybe less than 10.
Exactly, right? Like, and it feels to be almost like the Series B happens like in the FTX era when everyone was borrowing from Alameda and like money was free for VCs to give out. But ever since then, it's like Series A is already like kind of end stage. It feels like in crypto at least.
Exactly.
The only other thought I had when you mentioned like takedown requests, copyright and such, is the two projects that did raise a lot actually. And I'm still not sure like if I really believe in like IP on chain, and if it's vaporware or not, how that plays out. If it plays out and it's actually real and it works, then I guess you could have a pretty cool model where like you can literally have a proof showing no, this piece of data like is licensed or not. I'm still not sure like if that's going to play out. I'm curious in your opinion, like on the like, I guess what is the story and Camp network.
Yeah, I won't comment about the specific projects for political reasons, but generally the IP not narrative for space is challenging. I think I'll look at it as two ways. I think one, the way to actually represent the complexity of IP, so remixing of content, is actually really hard to do at scale. Like if you just think about it as like an infinitely sized graph, it's kind of hard to represent that on chain, just technically. I'm actually not sure how Story or Camp or any of these guys do it, but I imagine it's not as flexible as I imagine IP needs to be honest. Just principles as someone technical, I just don't think you can represent that on chain. So I think that's one. Two is if you actually understand the IP, just the IP regulation, it's horrible. The way the whole system works is just the probability that it can change is, I think, approximately zero. I think the cold start problem is you would need a lot of really valuable IP and the value associated with the IP to exist on one of these chains. But I think the bar is so high. If you look at the whole, like, the entire IP sector, should I say, let's say it's all IP is $10 trillion or something. Or maybe Story, I think, is 50 trillion or something. I don't know what it is, but it's a big number. Even if you have only, let's say, 500 billion of that, I don't think it's even enough to even win. I think it's a really, really hard market to tackle because it's so archaic, and I wouldn't even know where to start with that go-to-market. It is an absolute moonshot. Now, maybe Story and Camp can work it out. They know this space more than I do, because again, I'm not trying to build a content IP chain, so maybe I'm wrong. One subsection that I am actually very interested in is IP for AI datasets. I think that actually makes sense. The reason is that this is actually a new market, so there isn't a lot of like red tape and regulation. So there's a lot of freedom. However, there's also a big problem in that space where there's absolutely no price discovery for private data. So if a company wants to sell data to these AI companies, there isn't really no open market for doing so, or it's not very easy to have any form of price discovery. So I think there is some benefit to bringing that on chain. And we actually have a company we've incubated called Brick Road that is essentially building that on Irys and bring that on chain. But I think that only works, as I said, because it's a new market and there's just less restriction in that market. It's much, much newer. It's growing. It's still relatively early. So that does not apply to like the traditional IP, like the music, and all the art related IP, I wouldn't even.
Yeah.
Very difficult, very difficult.
IP on chain initially made sense to me because I thought, like, if you remember iTunes in the old days, like when it just came out, you could, like, I guess, scan the code on the back of like a record that you had and it would be added to your library because Apple would then know, like, oh, you bought the physical copy, so now you get it like online for free as well. Because you, like, when you buy a record, you own like the IP. Like, now you may make copies yourself. You may like burn it to other disks if you want because you like own the technical IP to use it yourself. And I've definitely like rebought games because I lost the original game or I switched from, I don't know, Steam to some other platform, right? Well, technically, I still like own the IP. Like, I should technically be allowed to like get it for free because I've purchased it once, but because I switched computers or whatever, and I couldn't find the code on the disk, I just rebought it. So in that perspective, I do think it makes sense that like technically like both your data and your IP maybe like kind of in this like platonic universe like are attached to you and you can reuse for forever. And especially in conjunction with AI, sometimes like I struggle to make, I don't know, ChatGPT reuse something because it'll go, this is copyrighted. And I think, well, yeah, but I do own the movie. Like, technically, you are allowed to inspect this data and use it because me personally, for personal use, I do have a license to like reuse this specifically. But I almost think as well that like big parties that actually own the valuable IP, like Disney and such, they wouldn't want a system like this. Like, they want you to technically kind of lose your IP, repurchase it. Like HBO, Netflix, and Prime, they want to like own a movie for 3 months, then remove it so that users keep like switching between the services, right? And indeed, like you said, like it's so archaic, and I guess like the IP world does not really want this. I guess kind of very similar in the data world maybe as well, where like indeed like you want the user to own it or like free access to it, but probably some parties out there specifically want it to be like really obscure. They don't want like good price discovery because they actually benefit from very one-sided informational markets.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think there are a lot of markets that are like that. I'll be interested to see where the IP market goes. I actually want to be wrong, because if the IP market works, it's massive. It's as a story protocol is right when they say it's multi-trillion dollar. It is a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. So if they can bring some of that on chain, then I think that's useful. But let's see.
Yeah, and to be honest, I just prefer to see things succeed than fail, right? If it's like a cool new idea, some new experiment, I just prefer to see that it works out, even if I initially thought it never would. We're nearing the end of the podcast, Josh. I'm not sure if you've like any closing words, but I learned an insane amount from you. I'm very impressed with Irys. I'm going to keep checking it out, and maybe some closing words for the community and some stuff to watch out for in the next coming months.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for if you've listened all the way, then thank you. But if you want to reach out to me, Josh_Benaron, it's just my full name, on everything, Discord, Telegram, Twitter, everything. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm always online 24/7. Even when I'm asleep, I'll find a way to respond. In terms of what's coming up, we have, I think our big milestone is mainnet is coming pretty soon. So we'll be both launching our layer 1, which is going to be relatively soon, and also launching our token as well. So those are the two big milestones coming up, and we also have a bunch of partnerships coming up as well. So we'll be, if you just follow us on X, you'll see all of this over the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Awesome. All right, Josh. Well, thank you so much. I won't steal any more of your time. It's late for you in Korea, so
this is actually, believe it or not, early in my day.
Early in the day. Okay.
I stay up incredibly late, but if anyone's listening, it's 1 a.m. and this is early in my day. I still have a few hours left, so don't worry.
All right then. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have you on the cast again post mainnet, and then I'll hear the entire story on that.
Yeah, let's do it. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much, sir. All right. Have a good one, everyone. See you next week.